Is it good evening? Is it good afternoon? It's 5:30. It's welcome to the Military Women's Memorial, is what it is. My name is Phyllis Wilson. I'm an Army veteran of 37 years. And no, that was not why I took. Most importantly, I work here at the Military Women's Memorial. I've worked here for 4 years. Just a couple of days ago, the memorial celebrated its 26th anniversary. And you're sitting in part of what we have recently renovated. This used to be a sloped floor, 196-seat theater. It was 25 years old, and when you sat in those seats, because it was 25 years old, you tended to feel like you were going to slide right out the front of the seat. So as we made decisions on what to do with this space, part of what we decided to do was use it for a myriad of reasons. One of those being where you could come and sit and enjoy either watching documentaries or live performances, panel discussions, conversations, great shows, great promotions, retirement ceremonies of both men and women in the military, and commissioning events when young men and women in our country step forward and raise their right hand as they're sworn in. One of the things that we do here at the Military Women's Memorial, one of the most important things, and Francesca just learned about that today, is we have the national database of military women and women that served with, not only in the United States military. Her mother is registered in our national database. She served in the USO, over in Europe, during World War II. Kind of amazing that she just learned about that today. So I wanted to share that with all of you. If you have a woman, or you are a woman that has served or is serving now in the United States military or served with, if you were a donut dolly in Vietnam, if you were a USO or Red Cross woman, if you did any of those kind of things, trust me, we want your stories in our national database. We are the only major national memorial that tells the stories of the little over 3 million women that have defended this country. So every woman, once they register, their story to me looks like a big baseball card. Their photo, what team were they on? In this case, Team Army. What years did she serve? What were her memorable experiences, her awards and decorations? Where did she serve this great country around the globe? And last but not least, her member number here at the Military Women's Memorial. So whenever I ask somebody, are you registered at the memorial, you either get the deer in the headlight look, I don't have a clue what you're talking about, or they'll tell you proudly, yes, I'm a member, or those lucky souls that registered before we opened our doors that say, I'm a charter member, and they say it very proudly. Our goal this year is to add 23,000 new women's stories in 2023. So how many will our goal be in 2024? That's right, 24,000. We've fallen woefully short this year, but it's not for lack of trying, it's lack of knowledge. And so you now know that if you have a woman, whether she's serving or has served, at any time, all the way back to the American Revolution, we want her story. We need her story, because history here will never be complete until all of the stories are here. And we can only tell the stories of those who have put their stories here with us. And we're very honored tonight to bring Grounded to you, to be the venue for Grounded. And without further ado, because you didn't come here to hear me, you came here to hear people like Tim Leary, the General Director of the Washington National Opera. Sir, thank you.
Phyllis, thank you so much. Friends, it is an honor for us at the Washington National Opera to be here with you all. An opera event at the Military Women's Memorial is an unusual addition to our usual venue list. But this year we're about to make history in the opera world when Grounded opens on October 28th at the Kennedy Center. Grounded is historic in a few ways. It's a co-production with the Metropolitan Opera. and its composer is Jeanine Tesori. She's most famous as a 2-time Tony Award-winning Broadway composer. Now she is, in my view, one of the greatest living opera composers. And when the Metropolitan Opera commissioned Grounded from Jeanine Tesori in 2018, it was the first time in their history that they'd commissioned a work from a female composer. The opera art form is 400 years old, and in 2018, the Metropolitan Opera made this commission of a female composer for the first time. As in many cases in opera history, the trailblazer was our artistic director, Francesca Zambello, who commissioned Jeanine's first 3 operas, including the opera Blue, which many of you experienced last season at the Washington National Opera, which won the Music Critics of North America Association Award for Best Opera. Now, Grounded is based on an acclaimed play by George Brant, and it tells the story of an F-16 fighter pilot, a female pilot named Jess, who becomes pregnant and is therefore grounded, unable to fly. She is reassigned eventually to the drone program, and through tonight's discussion, you'll hear more about what that means. Our panelists will say a word about themselves in a moment, but I'm going to say a word about them first because they're too modest, I think, to tell you about all that I will tell you. We have an extraordinary group of people gathered here tonight. So first we have a retired lieutenant colonel who today is a noted speaker, coach, and mentor. She served in the Air Force for 20 years, flying the T-38, T-37 Tweet, the A-10 Warthog, the MQ-1 Predator, and the MQ-9 Reaper. She's also a graduate of the prestigious U.S. Air Force Weapons School and has more than 3,000 total flight hours and more than 1,500 hours of combat support, time in both Iraq and Afghanistan, supporting and protecting our troops by providing real-time reconnaissance and lethal support. Her own story closely resembles that of the character in the opera, but I'll let her tell you about that. Please welcome Colonel Tammy Barlette. Next is our award-winning playwright. His plays have been performed in prestigious venues all over the world. He's won a host of awards, including the Smith Prize and the Keene Prize for Literature. The play Grounded, a one-woman play, starred Anne Hathaway originally and has been performed in more than 180 productions in 24 countries and in 17 translations. Given its beauty and its humane depiction of the costs of war to those who serve, the play is actually required reading at the U.S. Air Force Academy, and where he has been invited as a speaker and where he has even received a civilian medal. Please welcome George Brant. Now, do we have Cam with us? Is Cam here? Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to tell you about Cam anyway. Cam is a forensic psychiatrist with expertise in military and veterans issues. She currently serves as chief of psychiatry at MedStar Washington Hospital Center, but during her celebrated Army career, she held numerous leadership positions with Army medicine. She is an internationally recognized expert in the areas of disaster management and combat mental health issues. She has more than 250 publications on these topics and many, many others. So, in absentia, a round of applause for Dr. Elspeth Cameron Ritchie. And we have a retired U.S. Air Force major. He served more than 20 years in the Special Operations, Rescue, and Special Reconnaissance communities. He's been awarded the Knight Award and the Eaker Award for Outstanding Airmanship. Most notably for today's discussion is the fact that Major Swanson pioneered unmanned systems, or drones, including the Predator unmanned air vehicle, a UAS. In fact, he and his crew have the distinction of firing the first missile in combat from a UAS during the opening night of the air war in Afghanistan in 2001. Today, he's a noted speaker with a beautiful TED Talk, which speaks directly to the topics depicted in the opera Grounded. Please welcome Major Scott Swanson. There is no better place that we could imagine than the Military Women's Memorial to have tonight's conversation. We're truly grateful to the memorial for inviting us to be part of this. This place honors, as Phyllis said, the millions of women who have served our country since the Revolutionary War, but whose stories have been often left out of history. I'm aware that tonight we have many members of the service and veterans who are here with us. Could I ask you, please, to stand, both women and men, and be recognized, please? Thank you. Tonight's conversation is part of a series at Washington National Opera that we call Let's Go There, where we use opera and the power of music as a way of discussing the meaningful topics of our times. This is in service to one of our ideals of the Washington National Opera, which we call artistic citizenship. That's about creating a stronger civic fabric through connections that are made possible through artistic expression. And the person who coined the two-word phrase, artistic citizenship, is our amazing artistic director who will take things from here. Please welcome Francesca Zambello.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you. I'm so excited you're here, and I'm so excited to be here. And the fact that I just learned this about my mother is so moving that her story is here. She served 2 years in World War II in USO, trooping all over France and then Germany after the liberation, performing and flying around in the back of some plane, God only knows. And so I have a picture of her with her USO colleagues and their plane, which makes me nervous to look at. But she did that for 2 years, and so luckily I asked them about it, and they said, "Oh yeah, she's in the register." So the stories that she told myself and my brother, I will obviously write them down and put them in the records here. I'm getting a little verklempt right now about this. But we're here to talk about something so meaningful that's so much a part of what we try to do at the Washington National Opera, as Tim said, artistic citizenship. So many of the operas that we present have different fibers and ideas running through them, because we believe more than anything that art is a bridge. Art is a way to communicate. Art is a way to express ideas and have dialogue. And clearly, I don't need to tell everybody we're in a time where dialogue is needed desperately, internationally and nationally. So we are doing our own small bit of that with this exciting new opera. A new opera means a lot. For those of you who are not opera fans, it's a big deal. Most operas are by people who are dead. And so the fact that we have a new opera where the words are by this esteemed playwright, but the music is by a woman. The person who is conducting it, who is leading the orchestra, is a woman. The protagonist is a woman. It is about an Air Force pilot. Most operas and plays, think of Shakespeare, think of all those war stories. They're all about men, okay? And God bless you all the men who are here. I don't want to jump on you. But the fact that I want women to have their due, which was why when we began to work on this project with our colleagues, it was so meaningful to me to have a woman at the core of the story. Because it's not just about her service to the country, as you will learn. It is about that incredible dilemma that women face about your duty and your responsibility, in this case to her country, but her duty to her family and to having children. So just a quick word more to be clear on the story. It is, as Tim said, it tells the story of Jess, who is an accomplished F-16 fighter pilot, and she is grounded from flying because of an unexpected pregnancy. When she returns to duty, she is assigned to combat by operating lethal drones from a trailer in Las Vegas, which is thousands of miles away from the battlefield where she has served. So it's the juxtaposition of this elite training to protect and serve America by day, but at night, going home to her family. And this creates a real moral and psychological tension that plays out on stage. And that's just the kind of psychological tension that music can speak to. Words tell stories, but music tells so much about emotion, and we're going to get a chance to hear some. So that's why Let's Go There, as we call these discussions, is really about the perils of combat mentally, physically, and what it does to all of us. But we hope this evening that we can educate those who don't know and also celebrate. So before we begin our discussion with this incredible panel, we're going to give you a taste of the music. You are the first people to hear any of this music in public. You are the first people. Okay? So the leading character, Jess, is what we call a mezzo-soprano. And today we have with us Hannah Shea. She is a member of what we call our Cafritz Young Artist. These are 12 singers who are part of our company, who do many of the smaller roles often and do leading roles in other productions. In a way, I guess it's kind of like being a private and working your way up. I'm thinking. I'm trying to come up with a good analogy. Anyway, she is going to perform several excerpts from the opera, and she is accompanied by a wonderful member of our music staff, Joy Shire. So I want us to welcome them. I'm going to just tell you one quick thing before we start. The first thing we're going to hear is an aria. An aria, we always have to use Italian words in opera, God knows why. Aria is a song. It's a song. And this is a song that's called All for the Blue. Comes as the beginning of the opera, and the character Jess sings it with the men's chorus, big men's chorus, 70 people in the orchestra. It's a lot of music, big sound. But they'll convey that on this electric piano. And it's all for the blue, all for the blue. And I think for anyone who has ever flown, it is about the incredible exhilaration that she experiences as a pilot in the air, and her connection with the world around her when she's in that tiny, tiny plane. So let's welcome, please, Hannah and Joy.
comes from a little bit later in the opera. It's actually a combination of little excerpts, because when you see the show, you'll find that Jess rarely sings on her own, which I think is a real reflection of anyone's experience in the military, working as a team, as a unit, and Jess is always singing with the chorus. So this next selection is a combination of little bits of the opera that come from Jess's various missions once she has returned to the Air Force after 8 years away, raising her child, working as a mother, where she decides it's time to come back, and she's assigned to operate a drone. And she finds the stark contrast from flying an F-16 to sitting in a windowless, cold trailer in the outskirts of Las Vegas to be a very startling contrast. And this scene kind of paints a picture of her new environment, of countless voices in her headset, which she calls the kill chain, constantly shouting orders at her, but also some unexpected adrenaline that comes from these missions. So without further ado, here's some of Jess's missions. Wait, there's something, a dot, zoom, a man, eyes on 7 men by the side of the road. 2 miles ahead of our boys, They are doing something, they're doing something to the road. You can tell the cameras are that good. You can tell how old if they're women or men or children. You don't see faces, not really. But you don't need to. Your mind fills them in. And these are the faces of military-age males who are doing something to the road. My pulse quickens, ridiculous. I'm sweating, my pits, my hands. I'm not there, I can't be killed. The threat of death has been removed. The threat of death has been removed. I'm not there, I can't be killed. The threat of death has been removed. The threat of death has been removed. I am the eye in the sky. There is no danger. The eye in the sky waits for the gray-headed people to come closer together. Just a little closer, closer,
Pushing it. There, it's green and red, so I think it needs a new battery. I will use my big person voice for a second and welcome our, we're gonna need that, okay. That needs a new battery because it's flashing green and red. Thank you. That's as far as my tech knowledge goes. Okay, I just want to be clear on that. So thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Joy. That was absolutely magnificent. Of course, as Hannah rightly said, when you see the opera, you'll get the point of all of that, of the time that she spends in the trailer operating the drone. And it was so amazing. Tammy said to me, sitting next to me, it is really cold in the trailer. But of course, as the story unfolds, this whole psychological dilemma between her personal life and what she's doing and the moral issues about her actions are the things that eventually lead her to take something which I will let George talk to us a little bit more about. I want to invite all our panelists up here. Oh, good afternoon, you just made it. We did introduce you, even though you just got here now. So why don't our panelists come on up and we'll begin our discussion. Welcome. Okay. So I think, Tim was so great, he gave a little intro to everybody, but I think it would be wonderful just to have each panelist, if I may ask, just express in their own words what they do and who they are before we sort of kick off our discussion. Tammy, if I may.
Well, I'm Tammy Barlette, and I grew up in Minnesota, and there's not a lot of military presence in Minnesota, but there was something inside of me that said, I really want to serve my country. And so when I showed up at the University of Minnesota, I sought out their Air Force ROTC program. And one of the first questions they asked me, and I think they ask every incoming student who wants to be a cadet, is, do you want to be a pilot? And I thought about it, and I thought, a pilot? I've never met a pilot, let alone a female pilot, but I gave some consideration to it. Being a gymnast and a roller coaster kid and a tree climber, it seemed like the perfect opportunity. Have my office in the sky. That sounds amazing. So I pursued that opportunity. I got selected for pilot training. I went to pilot training and went on the fighter aircraft track. My first assignment was as a T-37 instructor pilot, which was a phenomenal job. I didn't want it at the time, but it was amazing. And then I went on to fly the A-10 Warthog. And after that, I had cervical spine reconstruction due to an aircraft injury. And I went and flew the MQ-1 and the MQ-9. So the Predator and the Reaper, what we're talking about here in this story here, in this opera. And I had 2 kids while I was flying in that platform. And I went to weapons school. And then I ended my career 6 years. I went and sought a waiver or an exception to policy to go back and fly high-G aircraft, where I taught in the T-38, which is a small fighter trainer, for the last 6 years of my career. I retired in 2018. I became a professional speaker who started a speaking business that features military women pilots. And I also own a business that does mental performance training, like professional athletes get, but for aviators. And that's what I'm doing now.
Fantastic, thank you. George.
I've got a green light. Yes, I'm George Brant. I actually was born around here in Silver Spring. My dad was a judge advocate general during Vietnam, and so I was born near that base there. And we grew up in Chicago, where I thought I was going to pursue a life in acting, and then slowly transitioned out of that into more of the writing side of things over time. Went to grad school at UT Austin at the Michener Center there. My plays started out more comedies, and I don't know at what point they became so serious, but I don't know what happened to me. But yeah, in Chicago, I think because of, Second City and everything, it's a very comedically heavy town, and I think I was trying to compete with everybody there, and then after leaving there, maybe it got more serious, I don't know. But yeah, so then this play came along and kind of changed my life. I didn't ever expect it would have the journey it's had. It's, as mentioned, it's a one-person play originally. I kind of thought it would be a play that would get done in, 60-seat theaters if I was lucky. And instead, it's now becoming an opera, so it's been a very exciting journey for it.
Dr. Ritchie, welcome.
Thank you. So the Metro is a mess tonight, especially the Red Line. So my story is that I went to medical school courtesy of the Army. They paid for it, and if any of you have kids who are thinking about going to medical school, it is a great option, either HPSP, Health Profession Scholarship Program, or the Military Medical School out in Bethesda, where my pal Tracy works. And she and I have done women's health issues for a long time. So to compress a life, it's been back and forth between women's health issues and mental health issues. I was one of the founding members here back in the late 90s, and back then we had a series of talks when I was at Health Affairs on women's health issues, and I'll circle back to that a little bit later. And we were making great progress, but then 9/11 happened, and we went to war, and these days today are reminding me very much of that time preparing to go to war. And so the women's health issues kind of got left by the wayside. And I put out a book a couple years later, and by then we'd been in Afghanistan 10 years, and we were still not paying enough attention to women's health issues. So now I work as chair of psychiatry at MedStar Washington Hospital Center, which is in downtown DC. And it is a delight to come back to Arlington Cemetery, to the Women's Memorial, and to be with you all tonight.
Thank you, Doctor. Great. Major Swanson.
Hi. Also a Minnesota native. Grew up in the Twin Cities.
Is the mic working?
Hear me okay? Yeah. A little closer. So grew up in the Twin Cities. I was enamored with flying ever since I was yay high. My mom used to tell a story that people would ask what I wanted to do, and said, be an astronaut, fly helicopters in the Air Force, or pilot a mini sub like the old Jacques Cousteau mini sub. And ended up actually soloing when I was 16, and earned my private pilot's license the same week I graduated from high school. So enjoyed a very interesting career within the special ops and rescue community in the Air Force, flying helicopters. Very visceral kind of flying, very low to the ground. Got the opportunity to be involved with the UAS program, Predator, in the very early days. I thought I was only going to be there for 2 years, but with my background experience, got pulled into some of the special projects. We actually went into Afghanistan in 2000 and looked for and found bin Laden at that time, which led to the arming of the Predator to go back the following year. And that's when we were prepared and were there for the kickoff of the war. After retiring from the Air Force, worked with a number of small companies, mostly with developing technologies and products to help folks in the service. And currently working on the UAS program again.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you. When I spoke with you all and we met last week, I was so moved and so fascinated by everyone's stories, and we will get a chance to delve into that and get some Q&A. And I know at the end, I just want to do a plug for there's a lot of food and beverages back there that I think if you don't get to ask a question or it doesn't get answered in the process of this conversation, clearly it will get answered by hummus and Diet Pepper, Dr. Pepper back there. And I do want to say, when we had our first conversation, you all used so many initials and acronyms, and I was like, what? And I kept saying, you can't use those with you just can't. It's like Aria and Vivace, and it's like, what is that? So if you have never seen all these things, they will clarify them, but I also strongly recommend a visit to Udvar Hazy, where every single one of these planes and everything is actually in that museum, and it is one of the great museums, I think, of this country, and one that I spent hours with my son there for many times. So if you don't know about all these things, you really have to go there. It's incredible. And seeing a drone, the Reaper, up close was one of the most powerful things that I experienced in a museum. Anyway, so Tammy, when we first talked, Tammy was like, oh yeah, well, this is my story. This is my story. But you weren't grounded, you flew, you continued your career, obviously, for a number of years, and I think you were instrumental in changing some of the regulations. But could you talk a bit about how, if I may, how close to home this comes?
It's really very similar. I got a little bit choked up there. I'm like, wow, this is kind of how it is. I mean, there's some things that are very different. Just as far as my experience, I didn't fly the F-16. I flew the A-10, the Warthog, much cooler. But yeah, so I was grounded from the A-10, but it was for cervical spine reconstruction. I chose to go into the unmanned platforms, which we call remotely piloted aircraft, or RPAs now. And because it was just the best place for me to be at the time. With the background that I had with close air support, which is supporting our troops on the ground close in combat, and them slapping weapons on an unmanned system, they needed my background. Maybe not necessarily me particularly, but my background was very intriguing to them. So I joined a guard unit full-time in Tucson, and I got married and got pregnant, and I went to the flight doc, and I just wanted to confirm I'm really pregnant, and he says, absolutely, you're pregnant. He's like, and you're grounded. And I said, what am I grounded for? I'm like 3 feet off the ground in a trailer on the other side of the base. And he said to me, the regulations have not caught up, so I'm gonna apply heavy aircraft regulations to you. So you're gonna be grounded your first and your third trimester, but you can fly the second trimester. And so I went back to my squadron, and everybody knew I was pregnant, even though I didn't want them to know, because they're like, oh, you must be pregnant, you just got married. So they all knew. Thankfully it went well. She's now 15. But I worked with the flight doc very closely to get the regulations changed. We did some research, and we wrote some papers, and they changed the regulations so that I could fly actually all the way till 36 weeks. So once I got back in the trailer, I never was grounded again until 36 weeks. So then when I had my son, the second pregnancy, once they confirmed it was a safe pregnancy, I flew all the way through that pregnancy as well. Unfortunately, I did hear that the regulations didn't get communicated across all the bases immediately, so people went and had the same experience I did, which is really unfortunate. But it was nice to know it's been changed, so.
Well, not only are you groundbreaking in many ways, but you really have lived to tell, which is incredible. And I think these kind of stories are certainly what inspired our playwright. And so, as you may have heard, this began as a play with one woman character. It is now an opera where there are 7 main characters, a chorus of 24 men, an orchestra of 70, a very large production. So first of all, I'd love to hear first, just if you could share with us the inspiration. Obviously, okay, comedy went one way and you went in the other direction very quickly. What led you there?
Yeah, so this was like 2010 was when I started to get interested in the subject of UAVs and drones, and at that point they were in kind of a weird place where they were sort of top secret officially, but everybody kind of knew about them, so it was kind of odd, and it was hard to find much information about them. As they were increasingly being used, I was curious just as a citizen, but then part of my brain is always kind of, can I make a play about this? About anything, which is an unfortunate thing. But so I started looking into it and didn't know how to approach it until reading about the pilots and reading about what they went through. And actually it was Stars and Stripes online that gave me a few articles that were of great interest to me, talking about how they were finding that even though the drone program was promoted as, oh, there's no risk to the pilot, they were finding that there were PTSD rates actually oddly at the same rate as fighter pilots who were in F-16s and other planes. So that was very, very intriguing to me, because I certainly wouldn't have thought that would be the case. And that matched with this idea that that the war itself had changed, and that these pilots weren't actually overseas, away from their families, as a traditional warrior would be, but they were actually going home at night after their shift, and the challenges of that, and what did that mean to one's psyche and how much can one compartmentalize one's life. All those things were really interesting to me. And so that's kind of when the first spark really started to fly, and I could kind of see what I wanted to explore with it and what I wanted to learn about. I guess a lot of these ideas start with like, what do you want to research? Because so much research goes into all these plays, and this was very intriguing to me. And I didn't know if there was a play there, but I wanted to look more into it.
Where did you research?
Again, the Stars and Stripes were very helpful. At that time, it was very hard to get a image of what it looked like in the trailer. And the best one I got was from a very strange children's book that I checked out of the Cleveland Library that was like for young boys and was talking about how great drones were, and it had a picture of in the trailer this gold mine that I've been looking for. So that was very odd that's where I found it, but that is where I found it.
So, well, we're going to talk more about PTSD. We're going to come back to you, Doctor, if we may. I just want to talk a little bit more about drones, and Major, if you could really explain what it is like operating a drone. What does it feel like versus flying, having done both and being really at the beginning of this?
Sure. So the drones we operate today are very hand-flown. You've got a joystick, throttle, rudder pedals. The sensor operator's hand-flying that sensor. So it's a very interactive. You've got video screens, literally right there in front of your face. Nowadays, it's high definition. Those cameras are zoomed in, and you see things that can't be unseen. War by its very nature is ugly, and you're going to see things that are not the best things to see in the world. You're working together as a team, as a crew. It's that click that crews get when you're working on those targets. A lot of times, it's boring. You might be spending hours, days, weeks, sometimes months orbiting a high-value target until it's just that right moment to strike.
Who's on the team? Who's with you?
Right there in the GCS, you typically operate with
And GCS stands
ground
for?
control station. So the operating station. And originally was trailers. Nowadays they've moved them into the building. Got a pilot typically, a sensor operator. Often you will have some type of mission controller that would be helping coordinate some of the airspace issues and other things. An intelligence specialist be connected to the headset. You've actually got a video screen there with chat streaming. So it's like, a Facebook chat going on, but it's secure military. All of this feedback to that crew as to what's happening with that air sense, maybe talking to the people on the ground, other aircraft in the area. It can be busy. It can be extremely boring.
Interestingly, we do have a character called the censor,
Yep.
who is sitting next to Jess.
Crucial member of the team.
And the young man playing that role is crucial to the story. And there are offstage characters that are called the kill chain, that is all that in your ear. And so, Doctor, could we talk a little about PTSD and versus PTSD as we thought we understood it versus what it is now like in terms of going home at night?
Of course, and I'll try to keep my lecture to 5 minutes instead of 5 hours.
I think that'd be great, because then we can get into some more discussion.
First of all, PTSD, the acronym, stands for post-traumatic stress disorder. We first identified that after the Vietnam War, but we know it's existed in various forms for all wars. And we've learned more about it, not so much on how to prevent it, which we've tried to do, but how to treat it. And I wanted to talk a little bit about treatment, because some of you may have it. We probably know people who have it. So there's some things that are coming out now and more recently that are pretty exciting. But what is it? It's after a traumatic event that you develop a range of symptoms, include bad dreams and startle, and often withdrawal and isolation, drinking too much, sometimes suicidal thoughts. It's not good for relationships, so you may have relationships, marriages, others crumbling, and that in turn can feed a spiral of depression and anxiety and suicidal thoughts. You all have heard about the increase in suicide over the since 2004 in the Army and all the services. Some of that is related to PTSD, a lot of it to lots of deployments, failed relationships, and often people who are disappointed in themselves. It's not really due to combat per se so much. One of the things that's really important to know is good military training. It's very helpful in establishing unit morale and cohesion, which is a protective factor against not all symptoms of PTSD, but the real debilitating symptoms of PTSD. And so one of the things about drone warfare, when you're coming back home, is you don't necessarily have that unit morale and cohesion and playing either baseball together or fighting together, feeling that your person next to you is your brother, your sister, that tightness. You may still have some of that with, as you're describing your team with the UAV, but often you're going to the grocery store, to a world that just doesn't get it. So your head's in the space of, you've been looking over the battlefield, in first Afghanistan, then Iraq, and now the Middle East, and how do you talk to other people who haven't been there and who haven't done that? And that's really challenging.
What do you, you're over there nodding, which is great, and I'd love to hear, I think we all would, more firsthand, but could we just for 1 second before we get to that, George, could you just tell the end of the story of what happens, because what happened, we can give it away. You're still going to buy tickets. You're still going to buy tickets. Because I think it does relate to this, and then I'd love to hear more sort of firsthand experience. Would you? Because I didn't want to give it away. I thought you could do it.
Sure, man. Let me give it away, I guess. Yes. So over the course of the story, Jess, our pilot, grows increasingly. Managing these two worlds grows increasingly difficult, and she is having family problems. And those two worlds, at least how I kind of perceive it, are kind of almost in battle with each other. In my mind, at least, she kind of keeps pushing away the family part of it as she gets more obsessed with this one target that she's chasing, and kind of sees almost everything else as something that's going to hold her back in that. And then at the very end, again, in my version of the story to myself, is that her family kind of reasserts itself, and she actually sees her daughter on the screen in place of the daughter of this target that she's been chasing, and then has to decide what to do about that.
You're not going to give it away all the
I'm
way.
not. See, I keep.
Okay,
I'm stopping. I'm not going any
okay.
further.
All right. You're buying 2 tickets. Major, I see you nodding a lot, and I feel like just in our brief conversations, you would be the person who would be the cohesion in a group of people. I feel that from you, and that you would not let that happen to anyone in your unit. I sensed that from you when our first Zoom call.
Thank you. It's something I think we all strive to do, but it's also a very different kind of warfare. When you're deployed with your squadron, your team, your element, you eat, you drink, you party, you fight, you're all together, but you'll have that downtime to talk amongst yourselves and do that. At typical operations, you might be on 12 hours on, 12 hours off. You might be seeing an ISIS beheading in real time, or you might be taking out a high-value target in front of their family. And then you go home and you're coaching a kid's soccer game. It's a very different kind of world that we've created today.
Right. In a way, it's, of course, having a deployment, a live deployment. I know there are people in here who have done that, but in the world that we live in the arts world, in a way, I'm sure when you're deployed, there's also a time where that bond is so amazing
Absolutely.
together, which is fear and joy together.
And you go home and you've done things and you can't talk about it with your family because
There are a lot of lines in this opera where she goes home and she says, classified.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
her husband wants to have an intimate moment with her, and she's like, classified. Have you had those experiences? If I may, I mean, I don't want to like put everybody on the spot. But
No, I don't-
know we're
I don't
all
mind.
Curious.
I absolutely. I was talking to my mom and a friend of mine talking about how I was coming here to speak on this, and they said, "Oh, I remember when you'd come home and you'd say, I can't talk about that, Mom." And with my husband, I think some of the ease of getting through it for me is I have a background flying A-10s, and I did some thorough thought process work before I actually went into the A-10. So I think I did some advanced work that a lot of our pilots maybe had not done, but into this platform, I remember coming home and my husband would be like, "Oh, that's classified. She can't talk about that. That's classified." He would make jokes about it, which I'm not joking about what happened. That wasn't what we were doing. But he did make it easier to just kind of say, "Yeah, we can't talk about that," and we move on. And you do the talking in the squadron, and you deal with that way, because the reality is there's the other side of the coin. There's the side of the coin where we get to stay home and provide safety and security to our families every night. I get to kiss my kids every night. Is it hard? Yes. But I'm not gone for 6 months with them going, "Where's Mommy? When's she coming home?" So I think you have to take the good and the bad together and think about what you have. And I thought it was a blessing to be able to support our troops on the ground and truly help them, because that was what I loved doing. And I'll share a brief story because I think it's important to address the mental piece of this and why did I feel so stable. Before I went in the A-10, I was trying to decide which fighter platform I should select first on we called it a dream sheet, because we got to put our priorities first, and we didn't necessarily get our first choice, but you got to put them in order. And I said to someone, "I'm not sure I want to fly the A-10 because I might actually see who I'm killing, because ultimately that's what I'm doing. That's what my job is, and I have to recognize that." Because I was going through the process of, can I really do this? I've never done this. And as I was going through this process, that question came up, and I said, "Well, I'm going to see them." And the A-10 pilot looked at me and said, "Tammy, but you're also going to see who you're defending." And that's all I needed. Mama bear, I played soccer and I loved being a defender. I could care less about being a forward and scoring. That's been a theme throughout my whole entire life. And so knowing I could be, I was grounded from flying a fighter jet, but that I could still make a significant difference in helping our troops on the ground, that motivated me every single day to do the mission and do it well.
Thank you. There's a very important chorus that goes in the piece that says, "The threat of death has been removed." Hannah sang it once, but it's a musical theme that recurs, one of the themes. And so I wonder I'm sure there is guilt as well that's associated with that by staying home. Dr. Ritchie, I'd love to hear from you on this.
Yes, the term moral injury. Have you all heard that term? Many of you have. And that refers to guilt and shame. It's not a clinical diagnosis like PTSD is, but it is very toxic. Often it's to do with you came home and your best friend didn't, or maybe you shot up the checkpoint because the car with 5 Afghanis didn't stop, and then you realized they were children, so you were doing what you were trained to do, but still, it can eat at you. Let me say a little bit about treatment, both of PTSD and moral injury. And I think of PTSD treatment as in 3 buckets. The 3 buckets are medication, usually antidepressant medication. I'm a psychiatrist, that's what I do. Therapy, which is usually done by psychologists or social workers, and there's all different types of therapy. And then there's the everything else bucket. And the everything else is a lot of new and innovative things like acupuncture, yoga, exercise. There's some very interesting work being done with psychedelic drugs, such as mescaline and others, and things like that can really help with not just the PTSD part, but the moral injury part, trying to reconcile what happened and why, and have it make sense for you. There's a lot we don't know yet about psychedelic drugs and PTSD, so I can't go out and recommend it for you, but colleagues of mine are working very closely in that space, and I think it's very promising. The other thing I'd like to mention is animals. Service animals, pets, can be very useful for all kinds of feelings of loneliness and guilt. So that's another a drop in the third bucket of everything else. PTSD is treatable, and even if it's not totally treatable, going away forever, you can really reduce it. It's a unique disorder in that it has triggers that things remind you, the sound of the helicopters or the smell of flesh, burning meat. So that's what we found in Vietnam veterans. Many of them did fine for years afterwards, and then coming up on the 50th anniversary, the Tet Offensive, there were a lot of plays and novels and that could trigger folks, and people who had been doing well and suppressing the symptoms for a long time came back and suddenly were hitting the floor. When I got back from Somalia, all of a sudden I heard shots outside. I hit the floor. Oh, it's the 4th of July, those are firecrackers. But the 4th of July is a real tough day for most veterans, so be careful. But anyway, it is characterized by triggers, but things can be cured, or if not cured completely, at least you have a functional life again, good relationships, good work.
Did you interview a lot of people who were suffering from PTSD when you wrote this? I mean, I know you traveled around a lot.
So PTSD is very common in our military. We did a number of surveys called the Mental Health Advisory Teams in Iraq and not so much in Somalia, Iraq and Afghanistan. And probably about a quarter of our troops who have deployed have PTSD. You can be very functional with it, but the bad dreams, but then in combat, everybody's got bad dreams.
Right. And George, I know you interviewed a lot of people, going from the
Yeah.
science to theater.
Yeah. I mean, I mostly, kind of, after I'd finished the script, I would say started out maybe 50% research and 50% imagination, because as I said, at that time, not that much was available to the public as much as I snooped. So some of it I kind of was like, well, this is probably how it happens. And then at some point, I had to terrifyingly hand it over to a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force who, a friend of mine had written a military play, and he's like, oh, this guy's good. I think he was a stage manager in high school for Oklahoma or something. So he's like, he gets theater. And I'm like, okay. So then I had to sweat it out for a few weeks waiting to see what he thought of it. And and he gave me some wonderful, I kind of thought that the planes could hover more, and he's like, oh no, they orbit, they circle, and then, so just stuff like that was very helpful. And he was also good with, he's like, okay, I know you're not going to change this, but here's what it actually is. So I appreciate that he gave me some dramatic license for like where exactly the camera system is positioned and that sort of thing.
Since the opera and the play are situated in the beginning of the 20th century, actually, things have changed so much technically just in 2 decades, have they not? I mean, when you're talking about HD TV and seeing things that close,
Let me jump in before we go to the technology. Technology has changed, and I'll let you handle that, but the human being really hasn't. We're only a few generations from our fathers and grandfathers, usually male, and the human psyche is the same.
Just to jump in with that, it's more than a few generations. There's a beautiful quote in the opera and the play about the Odyssey, and of course Odysseus went and fought all across the Aegean. And I love that story of, well, what would it be like if Odysseus came home every night to Penelope? Technology.
Technology is absolutely changing. We've retired the Predator. We now have the Reaper, which is a jet turboprop version, bigger, beefier. Those are eventually going to be on their way out. The systems that we are developing for tomorrow are dramatically more autonomous. So you're not
autonomous meaning like
you're
there's
not
no
gonna
pilot
have that
in
person
right.
necessarily flying that aircraft. You will task it to go take out a target. You won't necessarily be directly involved with that. So things are changing in that respect. But there's also emerging technologies. So as an example, in Ukraine and what recently happened in the Middle East, they're using very small drones, the kinds of things you'd buy at Costco, with goggles. So you are looking through the camera and flying it, and they're flying them right into the tanks, the troop carriers, crowds of people. So it's different, but the same in many respects.
Right, right. Well, drones are everywhere now. I mean, every kid has a drone now.
Ubiquitous, unfortunately, in some ways.
I think, yeah, I think so. I mean, is AI going to affect this? Is that?
That's part of that autonomy. The good thing is that our government has a plan for, I don't want to use the word moral, but they have a way of looking at how we will employ AI in combat.
Wow. One thing that we talked about, and I'd love to just shift for a second, is the incredible feeling that I think you must get being in service to the country. The joy, the honor, the celebration. I know in the arts, we're in a different world, and we, I think, experience joy and pride and so many things. But I certainly, when I hear you all talk, I feel something that I just think it's incredible. So I'd love to look a little on the celebratory and the positive side, because in some ways also this piece is in honor of those who've served our country and a tribute to many. I mean, like when you talked about being drawn in, or you in Minnesota, I'm like, what makes people come to this?
Come to the service specifically? Well, for me, I can't explain exactly what the draw was, but I knew I wanted to serve my country. I would watch movies about the military, and I thought, I want to be part of that. I want to be part of the team. And I didn't even go in, like I told you, not even wanting to be a pilot. I just wanted to do the job, and it just happened to be the job that I got, and I loved it. And then when I got grounded from flying actual aircraft, it was one of those things where a lot of people went very negative. They were bitter, they were upset, but the thing is, I don't do halfway. So when I took on this new role, I took it on, and I did the best I possibly could do, and went into that ground control station every day, even though I didn't exactly know sometimes what kind of information I was providing for the troops on the ground. I knew it was helpful to them. And even though my butt wasn't up in the air having fun pulling 6Gs, it's not about that. It's about doing what our country needs us to do, and that's where the pride comes in for me, being there to help support and protect this nation.
I'm a lot more prosaic. As I said before, I joined because they paid for medical school. This was an era of HEAL loans, but there have been some incredible moments. Again, I'm reminded of 9/11 a lot these days. One of my jobs after was to help support the Pentagon, so I spent a lot of time talking to people who had lost family members. There weren't that many wounded. We expected more, but there were only a handful. And then putting together a family assistance center, helping plan for the memorials, supporting. And that kind of thing is just, words can't describe.
I grew up in a family with lots of vets. Both my mother and father were World War II veterans and served. I knew that was something that I was just gonna do. But there's definitely that camaraderie, that brotherhood that you build with folks that you've served with. My wife is Latina, she's got a big family, she's always talking to them. She doesn't understand why I don't talk to some of my friends. I've got friends in the military that I may not see for 2, 3, 5, sometimes 10 years, and you get together and it's a big hug. It's like it was yesterday, and that's the kind of experience that you build in that bond that I'm not sure where else you do that.
What about the sisterhood of pilots?
Well, that's an interesting question, isn't it? So he said brotherhood, and I felt some of you like, ooh, does that include her? Yeah, it includes me. It totally included me, and I felt it. Yeah, I was in a fighter squadron full of mostly men, and I'll be honest, when they stood up and was like, "Okay, bros," and Tammy in the back, I was like, "Oh God, do you have to do that? I'm one of the bros. It's cool. Like, it's fine." I never felt like I didn't fit in because that word was used. And is there a sisterhood? Absolutely. There's an organization I'm part of. It's totally unofficial. It's called the Chick Fighter Pilot Association. Totally necessary and very helpful, but incredible women are part of that. And I just want to point out, you just talked about not seeing people for a long time and then being like yesterday. My friend in the audience is sitting here. She let me stay at her house for 2 nights. I haven't seen her in like 15 years. So, Andrea, wave your hand. She flew. She also flew planes with me.
Ask her to stand up so we can see her.
Sure, you can embarrass her. There you go. She flew T-37s with me. That was our first assignment. We instructed together. She went on to fly the B-52, and now she flies for Delta. But it was literally like when she picked me up at the airport, and I thought I saw her the day prior. It was so amazing. So it's awesome. It is just like that. So it's the same. I had the same experience.
That's beautiful. That's really beautiful. We have a little bit of time, and I know that some of you have questions. And so if I could ask you to put up your hand, I'll call on you, and then I'll repeat the question. Or we do have a mic. Okay, this gentleman back here on the right.
And may I just say a word about women's health issues?
Sure, please, excuse me, of course, yeah.
We talked about that before. Women in the military.
I don't think you're on.
I'm blinking. Okay, so women in the military tend to be of reproductive age, and so pregnancy, breastfeeding, managing the stresses of those issues. How do I go? You flew when you were pregnant. That wasn't allowed back when I was in the military. We've broken some barriers. There's more to be done. My pet interest is urinary tract infections and how do you prevent those when you're in the deployed environment in the field. It's actually not that hard to do, but you've got to think about it and plan for it. Just like men used to get trench foot in Vietnam and you gave them dry socks, then we learned how to not get trench foot. We can learn how to not get urinary tract infections, and I've found that when I talk to, say, female police or female firefighters, a lot of them have the same issues, so can use the same strategies.
I think we could go with the abbreviation UTI on that one. Okay, questions?
Hi, I'm Joel Seidman. I work for NBC News, and Grounded has been of great interest to us. And we decided last week to go out to Creech Air Force Base in Nevada, about 45-minute drive from the Strip. And they gave us, sort of their interpretation of how things have changed since what I imagine is the timeline of this opera is the early 2000s, when the tempo of flying these aircraft was a lot different than it is now. What they showed us, which I thought was interesting, and just I wanted your impression of it, is that they have stood up a mental health facility, which is actually sort of interesting. So it's clergy, it is doctors, it is psychologists and psychiatrists. But what they told us is that each of them has a top security clearance, so that now they can talk to air crews about the missions in great detail. And that during the early 2000s, when Creech was probably flying a lot more combat missions, there was just a few clergymen, and there wasn't really very much ability to even talk to the squadrons. How important is it to actually discuss the mission in detail as soon as it happens?
Just making sure everyone heard that. How important is it to discuss the mission when it's actually happening? And thank you. He works for NBC News. You better give us some airtime. And visited Creech Air Force Base, which is kind of where this feels like it might be happening.
Yes, for sure. Yeah,
Yes.
You mentioned that, yeah. Oh, sure. That Yeah, that does take place at Creech. So that was another that was one of those things that a dramatist is like, it was almost too good to be true that it happened to be outside of Las Vegas, which it has such a kind of unreal place to begin with the fake pyramid and a fake New York, and it just was like, wow, okay, and that's where you put this kind of hard to imagine program where you're beaming yourself thousands of miles away. But I will hand it off as far as the more recent developments.
So that's a complex question, and it kind of depends on where and when. My father came back from Korea on a ship playing poker, nearly got court-martialed on his way back because he wanted too much money from his commander. And that was the way that we thought it should be done, but now as things evolve, you really have to tailor your intervention to what the needs are. I think most people in military intelligence and other related fields are very good at compartmentalizing. They may not want to talk about it right away. And then the British are there any British in here? Well, they've got a long tradition, as we do, of going to a bar after a bad event and sitting and have a couple brews, and that can be very helpful as well. So I would say, yes, it's important to talk, but you've got to make sure that you choose your time and your strategy correctly.
Thank you. Please.
I was going to add in, one of the things that most people don't realize is that the intelligence, the interpretation chain, you've got the pilots and the sensor operator, maybe somebody there in the ops center that's watching these videos. They're also being streamed live to intelligence centers all over the U.S. We've got young airmen that are watching those exact same videos for hours and hours on end. So it's not just those crews in the GCS. It's a much, much larger community.
Dramatically, I think what's fascinating, as George said, is that Las Vegas is like a gold mine because it's surreal and totally unreal. And so, what's amazing is what's a wonderful dramatic turn is her husband, Eric, gets a job in a casino as a dealer, but he's on the night shift, and so they both have this very surreal world. And there's a lot of references to driving around and the pyramid and all of that, which I think it is a bit of a gold mine dramatically to have something so surreal, for the protagonist and then the love interest as well. There was a question right here, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Wendy Fibbeson, and I want to know, are they using music as therapy for PTSD? And if they are they doing clinical trials to see how it works?
So there's a range of different options. I mentioned some of them. Art therapy is very useful. There's some wonderful drawings from the Defense Center of Excellence. Music therapy is useful. Other forms, exercise, relaxation, yoga. A challenge for clinical trials is usually they have to be funded, and usually it's the pharmaceutical companies that fund them. And maybe the Kennedy Center could fund music.
Whoa, 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 whoa.
We'll divide, this side will be the placebo group, and this side will receive the music therapy. And I bet you this side will do better.
We're in the not-for-profit world. We're out there with our cup all the time.
It's worth a try.
Right? I'm with you. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Doris Dixon. I'm co-chair of the Women Who Opera, and some of our ladies are here. My question is more about the opera and how you collaborated with Soaring, what you were looking for in the tonality. You said you've got a big chorus, a male chorus, a big orchestra sets. Tell us about that collaborative process.
Sure, a little, and then
Sure, I'll try to.
I do want to give a shout out to, we are opera companies because we don't have a lot of money. We got the cup out there. This is a co-production, which means that two different companies fund it. But it was commissioned by the Metropolitan Opera, and I want to acknowledge our colleague who's here from the Metropolitan Opera. This is Paul Cremo in the back. Back there is the dramaturg. But an opera begins with a story. And if you want to start with that.
Sure, yeah. So yes, it has been quite a process to go from a one-person play to, 40, 50-person opera. We had many challenges. I think one would be, you can't have somebody, while you can have somebody speak for an hour and a half, it's very difficult to have somebody sing for an hour and a half, especially opera. So one of the first challenges was, how are we going to give her a break? How are we going to get other people in there? In addition to, there are many characters mentioned in the play, so they were obvious candidates to be characters. But then we were trying to figure out how to get into her head and allow other people to have that opportunity. So I don't remember which one of us came up with this idea. We knew we wanted to have a big male chorus. We wanted to show that she was, standing out amongst her male colleagues. And then we thought of the fact that because there is this lack of camaraderie a little with UAV flight, that she creates her own drone chorus or drone squadron that's in her mind. So they keep her company once they are summoned, and can take a little weight of the singing weight off of her shoulders. So we were coming up with various techniques, which some were dead ends and some worked out. And then Janine and I, we were match made by Paul back there. He saw the play in New York in its original production, with Hannah Cavill, Paul Cremo back there, and thought it might be an opera, and asked Janine and I to have coffee together, and then the rest became history here. Janine really asked me to overwrite, to give her as many words as possible, which is definitely not my normal style. I like to be very economical. So that was kind of new for me. And she just said, give me as many words as you can, and I'll pick the phrases that I like. And by the end, we were having a great time of that, where I was giving a lot of slashes. I was like, this, slash this, slash this, slash this, and in parentheses, this word, maybe, maybe not. And we were starting to understand how each other worked. So it's been quite a process, and she and I are both rewriters to the bitter end. So I think we're driving everybody crazy. But we have tinkered with this during the rehearsal process. We are now stopped. We've laid down our pens, and we're letting everybody do their jobs.
Just for those who I hope will come to the opera perhaps for the first time, a new work takes several years, a number of years to come to fruition. And it does start with a story, with an idea, and with characters. You have to know who the characters are. And I think it's so amazing sitting next to Tammy, because she is, in a way, the protagonist. And hearing both of you talk about different people in your various walks of your life are so important, because in this case, the antagonist, the negative thing, is in a way the character's own destruction of herself, the psychology of the work that she's doing, and the moral weight of this. And so, to me, what's so great about this is it's Greek. It's like a Greek drama where often the protagonist destroys themselves, and that's in a sense what happens in this piece. And I do think the rest of the characters, they're just like hearing you talk about the censor, and then there's a character called the trainer who, when they introduce the Reaper, the first big drone, $17 million. I can't believe, that sounds actually cheap to me for something like that. He's sort of like a salesperson for that. And then Eric, who is the love interest. Very few stories succeed without love interests, even if they're unconventional. And in this case, he is a cowboy, and so he is very much of the earth, and she is very much of the sky. And so I think that's also comes through in the music. But it does start, I have to tell you, with a story. You got to have the story. The librettist goes first, usually, and then the writer, the composer, in this case Janine, takes a long time writing it, and she will tell you that after she wrote what's called the piano vocal version, just the version for piano and voice, then they have to write everything for the orchestra. In this case, there's an orchestra of 70 players, so you're writing for 70 instruments. What's the French horn playing? What's the trombone playing? Etc. So she locked herself on the North Shore of Long Island for 10 months and composed it there. And then we rehearse normally, we do workshops way in advance, usually a year or two in advance, to hear what it sounds like, to be able to cast it. And then the rehearsal process is usually about 5 or 6 weeks, and we're in the final rehearsal stage right now, and tickets are available when it opens from Saturday night. I think we probably have time for 1 or 2 more questions, or...
Weigh in real quickly, and then we'll... I have to tell you, I served in Iraq and Afghanistan as an intel soldier for Joint Special Operations Command, and I was not expecting to hear the opera, the words that you sang, and it dawned on me that I had tucked it away, but when you said, it's not a video game, it's shades of gray, and I thought, oh my God, now I was looking, and the 2 of you at least, and maybe somebody in this audience will know, and I'm going to hand it off as soon as I say it. We watched every second because our intel sent many of those drones on mission. And we had men on the ground nearby. And we prayed to God that our intel was accurate, and we were watching. You could see the heat signals from our men and the dogs, and you were praying to God nothing bad happened, that they would all get back on their helicopters and come home again, at least back to base. And what it was, you watched it for hours and hours and hours, and it became known as pred porn. Yeah. Predator porn, and you were addicted to it. You had to watch it, especially if you were somebody that had helped in sending that mission out, right? So I'm curious to know, how did you feel about that, knowing that so many others were also witnessing what you were doing?
I personally stuck to my mission. I didn't let myself go that big. It's just not useful for me. So that's how I'm going to answer that question, truly. So I can't say what you...
Real quick, funny quip. Early on, I was flying a mission in the Balkans, was flying out of Hungary, over Serbia, and they had just installed a Predator feed into the European Command headquarters, and General Wesley Clark was the SINC UCOM, so the head general there. I'm flying my mission.
SINC is Commander-in-Chief.
Commander-in-Chief, Jefe. The phone, we had a phone in the GCS, rings, and he goes, "Go back, I thought I saw a tank." Okay, first of all, who are you? And no, that wasn't a tank. He says, "I'm General Clark." Well, sir, I'm the pilot in command. We get a better video picture than what you get transmitted, over many times to there. That wasn't a tank. I'm flying. Don't ever call me here again. Yes, people from all levels would watch the feed and have some kind of feedback, and yeah, we had to turn it off.
One thing I want to say, when I was going through weapons school, that was interesting was that, and this applied in a different capacity when we're flying combat missions, but because it's on the ground, anybody and their brother who had a clearance thought they could be invited to watch the show. And sometimes they'd be like, okay, can so-and-so come in? Can they come in with so-and-so and so-and-so? And so I'm literally flying my plane, and I'm like, why don't we just take off the side panel and you could put an audience out there if that's what you need. I mean, that wouldn't be great, but I'm just saying that's the interesting piece of this that we had to keep in mind, is that, but as the pilot in command, if you're thinking that far, you're not in the game. And I'm not saying you did that, but you have to be careful because the capacity is there for a lot of people to see what you're doing. And if you're worrying about what they're going to say about what you do, now you're not in the game either. So.
Wow. Intense. I think we have time for one more question before yes, ma'am.
Hi, Rachel Pardo. I'm a Navy veteran from surface warfare and was in the 2 Gulf Wars, Bosnia, went back to Kuwait when they were pulling out. I think when you go back to the history of, the 10,000, 15,000 years of human history, in order to make warfare palatable on any level, you have to get to it's us and them. You have to dehumanize, and this has been written, through Chinese, philosophy and, people who study war, that you have to empty yourself of the humanity of the enemy, and then coming back when it's all said and done, fill yourself back and readjust to the world being one. So it's very difficult to make those transitions between, active warfare and home life, normal life, going to the grocery store, as you said, and cutting that off. And I think to give a shout out to the VA, in many ways they have this huge population base to study. As our Vietnam vets reach, their 70s and 80s, they're coming back to these, as you said, the TET anniversary of the 50 years, they're coming back to these memories and the treatments that they do use, music therapy, and the VA does do, art therapy and some other things. It's such a huge bureaucracy that they're stymied by a lot of things, but they have, a bit of insight into PTSD treatment. And how do you feel about that, Dr. Ritchie? Do you interact with them to, adjust to, coming back? What are your thoughts?
Another 5-hour reply. I think the VA is wonderful in many ways. It's really been a leader in PTSD. It is a bureaucracy. It frustrates many, including myself. I worked there for a while. But they've really done some leading work. I think a challenge for them is the close supervision of Congress, looking at everything they do, so somebody will have a good idea, will it get through. The military is actually pretty agile in terms of new treatments. They've done a lot of the legwork in some of the things like art therapy, and the military doesn't have to ask insurance to compensate. So they can, if they have a treatment, they'll just try it. Acupuncture, we'll give it a try. Reiki, we'll give it a try. And they're pretty good at doing clinical trials. So I think both the VA and the military are doing everything they can. It's quite a task after 23 years of war, just in this last 23 years.
I think we all have to help do our bits. And I think that everyone here I know, I hope, can go out and find some way to help. I always think we can all do something better for somebody else every day. So we are going to try and do our bit through art and help in any other ways. We're certainly open to suggestions. We're very, very grateful to having been here today at this amazing building with this incredible group of panelists, Lieutenant Colonel Barlette, Major Swanson, Dr. Ritchie, and George Brant. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here with all of you. You can have a chance to visit more with everybody. Like I said back there, there seems to be a very nice spread. We're very, very grateful to all of our friends here. I feel like we're going to move over here from the Kennedy Center. We don't get, it's not as nice at the Kennedy Center, all that spread, okay? Just telling you all. But we want to help and do our best to serve, respect, and honor everything that you all have done for our country, and everyone who is here who has served in some way or another. We are extremely grateful. Thank you very much, everybody, for being here. Thank you so much.